Before Helmgart fell, the guns were still singing. High in the grey mountains, where the road narrows between cliffs of black stone and the clouds hang low enough to choke on, a company of Empire handgunners made their stand in the rain. They had no reinforcements, no retreat, no hope worth naming. Below them, the pass crawled with horns, blades, and hungry eyes. Above them, their officers spoke brave words, and beneath them, in a chapel sealed for centuries, something old and patient listened to the thunder of black powder and waited to be paid. This is not a tale of victory. This is the story of the last men at Helmgart, the bargain made in darkness, and the final volley that shook the mountain apart. Chapter 1. Powder. Smoke. Over the pass, rain came down on Helmgart like nails from a coffin lid. It hammered the slate roofs, hissed against the watchfires, and ran in black threads down the old fortress walls. The pass below was half drowned in mist. A long wound cut through the grey mountains where the road crawled westward between cliffs of wet stone and crooked pine. Far below, the river was a pale slash in the dark, swollen with storm water and carrying broken branches like the bones of drowned men. On the outer redoubt, Sergeant Oskar Brandt tasted powder on the air. That was impossible, of course. The company had not yet fired a shot that morning, but Brandt had been a soldier long enough to know that battle announced itself before drums, before horns, before the first scream. Sometimes it was a stink, sometimes a silence, sometimes just a pressure behind the teeth, as though the world were biting down. He spat over the parapet. The gobbet vanished into fog. "Damp pans!" he growled. Corporal Janik Holt, who was young enough to still polish his breastplate and foolish enough to think that mattered, looked up from his matchlock. "Sergeant?" "Your pans are damp." Holt glanced down. Rainwater had gathered in the flash pan of his handgun despite the oiled cloth wrapped over the lock. He cursed, wiped it out with his sleeve, and began fussing with the weapon again. Brandt moved down the firing line, boots grinding grit and old blood into the stones. 37 handgunners crouched along the parapet of the lower redoubt, all that remained of Kranz's iron choir after 3 months of bad orders, worse rations, and patrols that did not come back. Their hats sagged with rain. Their sleeves were patched with leather and sackcloth. Their faces were grey with cold and powder grime that never truly washed away. They had been sent to Helmgart to stiffen the garrison. Now they were the garrison. "Keep your matches under your coats," Brandt said. "Check powder every 5 minutes. No man fires until I give the word, unless something with horns is chewing on his boot. Then he may use his judgment." A few nervous laughs rattled along the line. Not many. Lieutenant Mara Voss stood at the end of the parapet, looking down at the road through a brass spyglass. Rain glittered on the rim of her helmet. She had slept perhaps 2 hours in the past 2 days, and it showed in the hard set of her jaw and the bruised shadows under her eyes, but she still stood straight. That counted for something. Brandt limpel over to her. His left knee hated cold weather, stairs, and almost everything else about military life. "Anything?" he asked. "Fog," Voss said. "Trees, rocks, more fog. Fog rarely climbs hills by itself." "No," she said quietly, "it does not." Below them, the mountain road vanished into a white murk so thick it seemed to press against the fortress like wool stuffed into a corpse's mouth. The lower watchtower was barely visible, a squat black shape on a spur of rock, its beacon cage hanging empty above the roof. Then the beacon flared. Fire burst orange in the mist. It guttered once, twice, then roared as oil caught. A column of smoke crawled upward, whipped apart by rain and wind. Every man on the parapet saw it. Every man went still. Holt whispered something that might have been a prayer. A moment later, the bell in the tower began to ring. Not the measured toll for changing watch, not the quick call for muster, the alarm. Iron clamor rolled through Helmgart. It struck the courtyard, bounced from walls, and shivered through the bones of every soldier who heard it. Doors banged open. Men shouted. Somewhere a mule screamed as it was dragged from the supply yard. The fortress, which had spent the morning pretending to be dead, lurched awake like an old butcher reaching for his cleaver. Captain Dieter Krantz came striding from the inner gatehouse, with his cloak snapping behind him and 2 aides hurrying in his wake. His breastplate had been polished to a mirror sheen despite the weather. That, Brandt thought, was how you knew an officer still believed in speeches. "Sergeant Brandt," Krantz called. Brandt saluted with 2 fingers. "Captain, form the company along the west redoubt. The pass road is to be held. No withdrawal unless ordered. As you say." Voss lowered her spyglass. "Sir, the lower tower has lit the beacon, but sent no runner. That means either the road is cut or the tower is already lost." Krantz's mouth tightened. "Then we assume the worst. We have civilians still coming up from the tall cottages," she said. "Woodcutters, muleteers, shrine folk. They should be moved through the inner gate. They remain where they are until searched. For what? For enemies among them." Voss stared at him. Rain tapped steadily on her helmet. "Sir, they are peasants. Half of them are children. Chaos wears many skins, Lieutenant." Brandt saw her hand clench around the spyglass. Before she could answer, the first refugees appeared below. They came stumbling out of the fog in 1s and 2s at first, then in a ragged knot. Men with axes, women clutching bundles. A boy dragging a goat on a rope until the beast jerked free and vanished, shrieking down the slope. They ran like people fleeing fire, but there was no fire behind them, only the fog. One man fell before the gate road began to climb. Another tried to pull him up, then looked back and abandoned him. A woman carried something wrapped in a blanket against her chest. When she slipped in the mud, the bundle fell open and showed the limp arm of a child, blue-white and bouncing wrong. The gate wardens began shouting down at them. Crossbows were aimed. Questions were hurled. Nobody answered clearly. Their words came shredded by fear. "Horns! Under the trees! The tower's gone!" "They took Klaus. Split him, O holy hammer! They split him." Brandt turned back to the line, eyes front. Holt swallowed. "Sergeant, are we opening the gate?" "That is officer business. What do we do?" "Soldier business. What's that?" Brandt looked at him. "We stand here and kill whatever comes after them." The first horn sounded from the fog. It was not a clean note. Not brass, not hunting horn, not the proud call of men going to war. It was a wet, bellowing roar, deep and cracked, like a bull drowning in its own blood. The sound rolled up the road and over the walls. Several of the refugees collapsed outright. One of the gate wardens crossed himself and forgot to keep his crossbow level. Then came the drums. Thump, 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 thump. Not many at first, then more, answering from the slopes. Hollow skins beaten by heavy fists. The rhythm crawled into the gut. It was too slow for marching, too steady for madness. It sounded like something enormous, knocking from inside the mountain. The fog moved. Brandt had seen beastmen before. Every soldier of the Southern Empire had, unless he was very new or very lucky. He had seen them dead in ditches, strung up outside villages, painted on warning boards for children. But it was one thing to see a horned corpse. It was another to watch the forest vomit them out. They came low at first, loping on bent legs, shapes half hidden by mist and rain. Horns jutted, axes swung, hooves struck sparks from stone. Their bodies were thick with matted hair, raw scars, iron rings, scraps of stolen mail. Some wore human bones tied into their beards. Some carried shields made from doors with the handles still attached. One had a human face nailed over its own like a mask, the lips flapping as it ran. Behind them came worse things. Men who were no longer entirely men. Mutants with swollen limbs and too many fingers. A hunched brute whose torso split down the middle to show a vertical mouth lined with yellow teeth. A thing crawling on 6 arms, dragging a rusted sword in each hand. The refugees screamed and threw themselves against the gate. Kranz raised his sword. "Hold fire!" Kranz's hand went up along the line. "Hold!" The enemy surged closer. The leading beastmen overtook the fallen man on the road. One buried an axe in his spine with a meaty crack, then hooked the blade under the ribs and hauled him backward, laughing in a barking tongue. Another seized a woman by the hair and tore her sideways so hard her neck snapped. Her body folded bonelessly under hooves. Holt made a small choking sound. "Hold!" Brandt said. The gate began to open just wide enough for the refugees to squeeze through. Wardens dragged them in one by one. A boy got caught between bodies and screamed as the iron edge pressed his shoulder. Voss ran down from the parapet steps, shouting orders, shoving men aside, forcing discipline into panic by sheer fury. The beastmen saw the gap and charged. "Sergeant!" Holt cried. "Hold." The range closed. 60 yards. 50. 40. A horned brute bounded ahead of the others, muscles pumping under rain-slick hide. It carried a cleaver the size of a shovel blade. A crossbow bolt struck its chest and vanished into hair. It did not slow. It reached the last refugee outside the gate, an old man crawling on hands and knees, and stamped down on his head. The skull burst against a stone road, spraying gray matter and teeth into the mud. Brandt dropped his hand. "Fire!" the iron choir sang. 37 handguns cracked almost as one. Flame spat along the parapet. Smoke belched outward, instantly torn by rain and wind. The front of the beastman charge disintegrated. The brute with the cleaver took 3 balls through the chest and 1 through the throat. Its back exploded in wet chunks. It ran 2 more steps without understanding it was dead, then pitched forward and slid face first through the muck. Another beast lost its jaw. It spun away, shrieking, tongue flapping over a red ruin where its mouth had been. A mutant's shoulder came apart under a heavy shot, arm dangling by strings of meat. 2 more collapsed behind it, tripping the ones that followed. "Reload!" Brandt roared. The line moved with brutal practice. Bite cartridge, prime pan, pour powder, ball, ram, lift, match. The enemy did not stop. They crashed over their own dead. hooves punching into bodies, claws scrabbling on stones made slick by blood and rain. Arrows hissed up from the fog. One struck handgunner file under the eye and punched out the back of his skull. He dropped without a sound, brains steaming on the wet flagstones. "Close the gap," Brandt barked. Holt shuffled sideways, face pale, hands shaking as he rammed his charge. The gate slammed shut below with 3 refugees still outside. One of them hammered on the iron with both fists. A beastman reached him first, hooked a hand under his chin, and peeled his face backward from the bone. The man's scream became a bubbling gargle as his features came away in a red sheet. "Second rank!" Brandt shouted. "Fire!" Another volley tore down into the road. At this range, the balls did not merely kill. They smashed, they pulped. They drove fragments of bone into those standing behind. A beastman's horn snapped off and spun into the air. Another took a shot through the belly and sat down suddenly, trying to hold in loops of intestine that slithered between its fingers. The fortress cannon boomed from the upper wall. The shots screamed over the redoubt and struck the road below, plowing through the packed enemy. Bodies burst apart. Limbs cartwheeled. A shield, still strapped to a severed arm, slapped wetly against the gate. For a moment, the charge faltered. Then the drums changed. Thump, 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 thump. From the left slope came a howl. Beastmen were climbing the scree, scrambling up goat paths toward the outer wall. They moved fast, hunched shapes bounding from rock to rock, using axes as hooks. One leapt too soon, missed the ledge, and fell screaming through the mist. Others climbed over him before he had finished falling. "Left wall!" Voss shouted, appearing back on the parapet with her sword drawn. Blood streaked one sleeve, not hers. "Shift left." Brandt did not waste breath agreeing. "Holt, take 6 men, with me." They ran along the wall walk as the first climbers reached the parapet. A beastman's hand slapped onto the stone, claws scraping. Its head rose after it, eyes bright with slaughter, muzzle split in a grin. Brandt fired his pistol into its face. The shot blew the back of its skull out. For one instant the thing remained hanging there, fingers twitching, face gone from nose upward. Then it fell, knocking 2 more from the rocks beneath. Another beast vaulted over the parapet and landed among the handgunners. It swung a spiked club into handgunner Mars's chest. The breastplate caved inward like tin. Mars flew backward, blood spraying from his mouth, ribs driven through his lungs. The beastman roared and raised the club again. Voss met it before Brandt could. She ducked under the swing and cut across its thigh. The blade bit deep, black blood spilling over its knee. It turned on her, faster than something that large should have been. She barely got her sword up as the club came down. The impact drove her to one knee. Holt jammed his handgun against the beast's side and pulled the trigger. The gun misfired. The beastman looked down at him. "Oh," Holt said. Brandt drove his bayonet into the side of the creature's neck. He felt the blade scrape bone. The beastman bellowed, grabbed the barrel, and yanked. Brandt went with it, letting his weight carry him forward. Voss rose at the same time and thrust her sword up under the jaw. The point came out through the top of the skull. The beast shuddered. Its eyes rolled. Then it collapsed, nearly dragging all 3 of them down. "Clean your pan!" Brandt snarled at Holt. "I did. Do it better." More came over the wall. For several minutes, the redoubt became a butcher's yard. Handguns were too slow now. Men fired once and reversed their weapons, swinging them like clubs. Bayonets punched into bellies. Axe blades rang against helmets. Rain washed blood across the stones in pink sheets. A soldier slipped on entrails and went down screaming as a mutant with a hooked arm opened him from groin to sternum. Brandt stamped on the mutant's knee until it broke backward, then put a pistol ball through the top of its head. A beastman seized handgunner Albrecht by the throat and lifted him off his feet. Albrecht stabbed it again and again with a belt knife, each strike sinking uselessly into thick hide. The creature squeezed. Albrecht's eyes bulged. His tongue pushed between his teeth. Something cracked wetly in his neck. Brandt shot the beast through the ear, and both bodies dropped together. The cannon fired again above them, shaking dust from the stones. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the assault broke. Not because the enemy lacked courage. Beastmen had too much of that, or something close enough to look the same from behind a gun barrel. It broke because the road below was a carpet of torn bodies, because the gate still held, because the redoubt had become too costly too quickly. A horn sounded from somewhere deep in the fog, sharper than before. The creatures withdrew, snarling and dragging their wounded with hooks and chains. Some crawled, some were dragged still screaming. One sat in the road, staring stupidly at the stump where its arm had been, until a cannon crew put a shot through it and spread it over 10 yards of stone. Silence returned in tatters. No one cheered. Brandt stood amid the dead and listened to the rain. Holt vomited over the parapet. He kept hold of his handgun while he did it, which Brandt considered promising. Voss wiped her sword on a dead creature's hide. Her hands were steady, but her face had gone hard in a way Brandt did not like. Too much knowledge did that to a person. So did suspicion. Below, the gate courtyard was a misery of refugees, wounded men, and corpses being sorted by urgency rather than dignity. A child cried for someone who did not answer. A surgeon's saw began its thin, patient song from under an awning. Captain Kranz walked the redoubt after the fighting. He praised the men. He called them brave. He told them Helmgart had stood for centuries and would stand another night. His voice carried well. Officers learned that trick early. The men listened because soldiers always listened when a man in a polished breastplate told them they were heroes. It was one of the crueler parts of the profession. When Kranz moved on, Brandt looked down the road. The fog had retreated just enough to reveal the lower watchtower. Its beacon still burned. Bodies hung from the parapet, not thrown, arranged. The tower crew had been nailed upside down to the timbers, split open from throat to groin, their innards dangling like butcher's ropes. Something had painted a symbol on the tower wall in blood, but the rain was already smearing it into meaningless red streaks. Brandt felt the old pressure behind his teeth again. This had been the first push, a testing blow, nothing more. Night fell early in the mountains. By dusk, the dead had been stacked by the sallyport, imperial and otherwise. The enemy bodies were burned where possible, though some still twitched as the flames took them. The men ate in silence, crouched under dripping canvas, chewing hard biscuits softened with rainwater and fear. Brandt found Holt sitting with his back against a powder crate, staring at his cleaned handgun. "You lived?" Brandt said. Holt looked up. "Didn't feel like I was doing it right." "Nobody does." "Does it get easier?" Brandt thought about lying. "No." Holt nodded slowly. "Right." Across the courtyard, Voss stood beneath the arch leading to the inner keep. She was watching Captain Kranz. The captain had left the officers' hall alone, without cloak or escort, carrying a lantern shuttered almost completely dark. He crossed the courtyard through rain and shadow, passing wounded men without looking down. At the far side of the keep, he stopped before a narrow stair half hidden behind stacked barrels and old masonry. Magister Adjunct Lothar Grimm waited there. The wizard looked smaller than he had that morning. His robes were soaked. His thin hair clung to his skull. In one hand he held a bundle wrapped in black cloth. In the other, a ring of keys. Kranz said something too quiet to hear. Grimm glanced around. Voss stepped back into shadow. Brandt watched from beside the powder crates, saying nothing. The wizard unlocked the lower door. It opened inward, with a sigh of old hinges and older air. For a heartbeat, Brandt smelled something that had no place in a fortress chapel: candle wax, grave soil, and meat left too long in a sealed room. Kranz and Grimm descended. The door closed behind them. Deep under Helmgart, beneath the rain and the wounded and the guns, something laughed. It was faint. It might have been stone settling. It might have been water moving through cracks in the mountain. But Brandt saw Lieutenant Voss turn toward the sound, and he knew she had heard it too. Chapter 2. The bargain beneath the chapel. By morning, Helmgart stank like a slaughterhouse left in the rain. The dead beastmen burned in trenches beyond the gate, their greasy hides popping and splitting in the flames. The smoke crawled low across the courtyard, thick and black, carrying the reek of charred hair, cooked flesh, wet wool, and the sour chemical bite of spent powder. Men moved through it like ghosts, their faces wrapped in cloth, their eyes red from sleeplessness and smoke. They dragged bodies by the ankles. They washed blood from the stones, only for the rain to thin it into pink rivulets that ran between the cobbles and pooled beneath the powder carts. Helmgart had survived the first assault. No one was foolish enough to call that a victory. Sergeant Oskar Brandt stood beneath the west redoubt, watching two soldiers try to pry a beastman axe from the breastbone of handgunner Mars. The creature that had killed him lay nearby, its head split open from crown to snout, steam still rising from the wound as though some inner furnace had not yet accepted death. Mars himself was folded around the axe haft, his chest caved into a red bowl. Every time the men pulled, ribs cracked like snapped kindling. "Leave the blade," Brandt said. The soldiers looked up. "Sergeant, bury him with it. If Moore asks how he died, Mars can point." One of the men gave a breathless laugh and immediately looked ashamed of it. Brandt did not blame him. Laughter was a leak in the soul. Sometimes it stopped a man bursting. He limped toward the gun line. The lower redoubt had been chewed badly in the night. A section of parapet had cracked where something large had battered it with a tree trunk. Crossbow bolts jutted from shutters and door frames. A severed hand hung from a roof beam by its own claw, swaying whenever the wind came down the pass. Men hammered planks across gaps, stacked stones, filled gabions with frozen mud, and muttered curses whenever their fingers went numb. Kranz's iron choir was down to 31 handgunners, half a dozen walking wounded, 2 barrels of decent powder, 3 barrels of questionable powder, and enough shot to murder an army if every ball flew straight and every enemy had the manners to arrive one at a time. Corporal Jennick Holt sat on an overturned bucket, stripping his handgun lock with exaggerated care. His face had lost the last softness of youth overnight. Blood had dried in a line from his ear to his jaw. Not his own, Brandt thought. Probably. You cleaned that lock 4 times, Brandt said. Holt did not look up. Then it'll be clean enough for 5. It misfired because your hand shook. My hand shook because a goat-headed bastard was about to beat me into jam. That happens. Does it? Often enough. Holt gave him a crooked grin that did not reach his eyes. Good. Thought I was special. Brandt almost smiled. Above them, the fortress bell tolled once. A body had been identified, or another had died under the surgeon. The bell had rung so often since dawn that the sound no longer startled anyone. It merely landed on the day like another drop of rain. Lieutenant Mara Voss crossed the courtyard with a purposeful stride, cloak dark with water, sword at her hip, pistol tucked through her sash. She carried a ledger under one arm and a bundle of keys in her fist. Her jaw was set tight enough to crack bone. "Sergeant," she said. "Lieutenant, I need 6 men for the lower stores." Brandt looked toward the inner keep. "Powder?" That is the official reason." He studied her face. Voss was young by officer standards, which meant she still believed truth was a weapon that could be drawn cleanly from its scabbard. Last night had put rust on that belief. Brandt could see it. "And the unofficial reason?" he asked. She glanced around. The courtyard was loud with hammering, coughing, prayer, and the wet scrape of corpses being dragged away, but fear made walls thin. "Captain Kranz went below after midnight," she said. "With Magister Graham, they entered the sealed chapel." Brandt said nothing. "You saw them," she added. "I see many things. You heard it too." The rain ticked on his helmet. Somewhere behind him, Holt stopped, pretending not to listen. Brandt leaned in slightly. "Lieutenant, there are 2 sorts of sounds in old fortresses, rats and things officers tell sergeants not to mention. And which was that?" "The second sort." Voss's expression hardened. "Then I am going below." "Bad idea. It is my duty. Worse idea." "Sergeant," Brandt sighed through his nose. "Take Holt. He needs something to do besides polish his guilt. Take Pfeiffer, Lenk, old Thomas, if he can stand, and anyone too ugly for the enemy to want as a trophy." Holt looked up. "That's me, then." "That's everyone, Holt." Voss nodded once. "No noise unless necessary." Brandt looked toward the road beyond the gate, hidden now by thinning fog. "Noise will find us soon enough." The stair to the lower stores was narrow, slick, and colder than the rain outside. It wound down through the belly of Helmgart in cramped turns, lit by wall sconces that spat orange light over sweating stone. The fortress had been built and rebuilt across centuries, each commander adding walls, cellars, shrines, storehouses, and secrets. Down here, the Empire's clean plaster and carved comets gave way to older masonry. Blocks of black mountain stone jutted from the walls like knuckles. Voss led with a lantern. Brandt followed, then Holt and 3 others. Thomas coughed behind them, wet and deep. He had taken a splinter through the shoulder during the night and refused the surgeon because, as he said, surgeons killed more men than beastmen and charged less for it. The air changed as they descended. Above, Helmgart stank of smoke and blood. Below, it smelled of mildew, old wax, rusted iron, and something sweetly rotten. "Lovely," Holt muttered. Like a priest's armpit. Quiet, Voss said. They reached the lower powder vault first. It was guarded by 2 spearmen from the household garrison, both pale, both pretending they had not been dozing. Voss showed her authority. Brandt showed his face. The guard stepped aside. Inside were powder barrels, shot crates, broken wheels, sacks of meal, coils of rope, spare match cord, and a row of civilian refugees huddled against the wall under blankets. A woman held 2 children close to her breast. A wounded tollkeeper lay shivering beside them, his left leg missing below the knee, the stump wrapped in red cloth already turning black at the edges. Voss frowned. Why are refugees in the powder vault? One guard swallowed. Captain's order, ma'am. Said the upper halls were full. With powder? He said here was safest. Brandt looked at the barrels, then at the lantern flame. Of course he did. Beyond the powder vault was a smaller door banded with old iron. Someone had removed the imperial seal from it recently. Fresh scratches marked the hinges. Wax flakes lay on the floor like scabs. Voss lifted the keys. None fit. Brandt stepped forward, drew a pry hook from his belt, and wedged it beneath the latch. Voss gave him a look. That is a sealed chapel. Not very well. The old lock gave with a shriek that made everyone flinch. Cold breathed out from the darkness beyond. They entered. The chapel under Helmgart had once been dedicated to Sigmar, at least in theory. A hammer altar stood at the far end, its gilding blackened by age, its twin-tailed comet chipped almost beyond recognition, but the imperial stonework had been laid over something older. The plaster on the walls had cracked in broad, curling sheets, exposing black rock carved with symbols that hurt the eye if stared at too long. Spirals, hooked crowns, a mouth with a candle where its tongue should be. Circles filled with scratch marks that might have been script, or tally marks, or the desperate clawing of prisoners. There were candles everywhere, not on the altar, not in holders. They grew from the cracks in the stone, crooked black tapers with flames as small and blue as dying stars. Wax dribbled upward from them, crawling toward the ceiling in thin threads. Holt made the sign of the hammer. That ain't chapel behavior. No one laughed. At the center of the floor, someone had drawn a circle in ash and blood. Within it lay objects arranged with careful precision. A spent handgun ball, a child's tooth, a strip torn from an officer's sash, 3 finger bones wired together, and a silver aquila bent until its wings formed horns. Thomas spat. Witchery. Chaos, Voss said. The word seemed to thicken the air. Brandt crouched beside the circle. The blood was fresh, not fully dried. He touched one finger to it, rubbed it between thumb and forefinger, and smelled iron. Human, he said. Voss looked at the altar. Behind it, hidden partly by a torn curtain, was a narrow fissure in the stone. It descended into darkness. The black candles clustered around it like fungus around a wound. Something whispered from below. It was not a voice, not exactly. It had the shape of one, the intention of one, but it moved through the air like smoke slipping under a door. Iron sings. Flesh pays. Gates close. Names remain. Holt raised his handgun with both hands. Sergeant. Don't shoot whispers, Brandt said. Waste of powder. Voss stepped closer to the fissure. Her face had gone bloodless, but she did not retreat. Who has been here? Brandt pointed to the floor. Mud. Boot prints. The narrow heel of Captain Kranz's riding boots. the dragging hem of Grimm's robes. Others too, older, smaller, bare feet perhaps. "Officers," he said. "Not just officers." Voss bent and picked up a scrap of cloth. It was blue and white, from an enlisted man's sleeve, a handgunner's sleeve. Brandt felt something hard settle under his ribs. From above came a muffled boom. Not cannon, not thunder. A horn, then another. The drums began again. Voss straightened. Back to the wall. They ran. By the time they reached the courtyard, Helmgart was already screaming. The enemy had not come straight up the road this time. They had learned from the first slaughter, or something cleverer had instructed them. The fog had drawn close while the men repaired the redoubt, and from within it came crude cannon fire. The first shot struck the outer wall beside the gate. The ball was poorly cast, uneven, and wrapped in chain. It smashed into the stone with a howl and sent shards flying across the battlements. One shard took a spearman's lower face off. He staggered backward, with his tongue hanging over his torn chin, hands fluttering uselessly before he fell from the wall into the courtyard. The second shot hit the roof of the stable and burst through tile and beam. Mules screamed as the building caved in. Men rushed to pull them free until black-fletched arrows began hissing down from the cliffs. "Positions!" Brandt roared. The iron choir scrambled to the west redoubt. Men shoved match cord into clamps, tore cartridges open with their teeth, cursed wet powder, kissed charms, and checked the priming pans with shaking hands. Rain fell harder, bouncing from helmets and pooling in the seams of the wall. Below, shapes moved in the fog. Not a charge, a machine. The enemy advanced behind a rolling wall of timber, shields, hides, corpses, and wagon wheels lashed together. It lurched up the road on crude axles, pushed by unseen bodies. Arrows and bullets thudded into it. Some punched through. Most vanished into wet wood and dead flesh. Behind it came ladders, dozens of them. "Ugly bastards have been thinking," Holt said, voice tight. "That's illegal for beastmen," said Thomas. "File a complaint," Brandt said. "Fire on my mark." The enemy cannon boomed again. This time the shot passed over the gate and struck the redoubt parapet 10 feet from Brandt. Stone exploded. Handgunner Lenk vanished in a cloud of dust and meat. When the smoke cleared, his legs remained standing for one obscene second. Boots planted, knees locked. Then they folded. "Mark!" Brandt shouted. The volley hammered down. Gunfire filled the world. Flames spat from the wall. Smoke rolled across the redoubt. The front of the timber barricade jerked and splintered. Something behind it screamed. A wheel shattered, sending the whole contraption sagging to one side, but the bodies behind pushed harder, roaring, braying, chanting, "Again!" Reloading in the rain was misery-made ritual. Powder stuck to fingers. Cartridges tore badly. Matches hissed and guttered. Men hunched over locks like mothers sheltering children. The second volley punched through a gap in the barricade. Through it, Brandt saw a mutant pushing with its shoulder against the beams, its back swollen into a hump of twitching arms. A shot struck it in the neck. It collapsed under the wheels and was crushed flat, its limbs bursting like overripe fruit under the weight. Still, the barricade came. Voss appeared at the parapet with a half-dozen garrison soldiers carrying hooks and firepots. "They mean to reach the gate under cover. They are welcome to try," Brandt said. "They will." He looked over the wall. She was right. The rolling barricade was 20 yards from the gate, and still moving. "Corporal Holt!" Holt swallowed. "I hate when you say my name like that. Take 4 men, down the Sally stair. We burn the cart." "Of course we do," Voss snapped. "I am coming." Brandt almost objected. Then he saw her face, and did not waste the breath. They went through the side postern, a narrow iron door opening onto a ledge above the road. The world outside the walls was chaos and fog. Arrows clattered off stone around them. A cannonball bounced somewhere below, with a noise like a giant cracking its knuckles. The air was thick with smoke, rain, and the animal stink of the horde. Brandt dropped first onto the scree slope. Pain shot through his bad knee. He ignored it and slid, boots kicking loose stones, pistol in one hand, fire pot in the other. Holt came after him, swearing the entire way. Voss landed lightly beside them, sword already drawn. They moved along the slope beneath the wall, half sliding, half running, while above them the handgunners fired to keep the enemy's heads down. The rolling barricade loomed through the fog, a stinking mass of wet hide and hacked timber. Human corpses had been nailed to its front, their bellies opened, their arms outstretched, as though begging Helmgart to embrace them. One was still alive. His eyes rolled toward Brandt as they approached, lips moving around a tongue that had been cut in half. "Sigmar, forgive us," Holt whispered. "Later," Brandt said. A beast-man stepped from behind the barricade, huge and black-furred, wearing a helmet made from a cooking pot, hammered into shape. It swung a rusted halberd at Voss. She ducked, but the blade clipped her shoulder guard and threw sparks. Brandt shot it in the knee. The joint burst sideways. The thing dropped with a roar. Voss drove her sword through its eye and into the brain. More came around the barricade. The fight became close, filthy, and immediate. Holt fired into the chest of a mutant with a pig's head in a man's hands, blowing ribs out through its back. He had no time to reload before another creature crashed into him, all elbows and teeth. They went down together in the mud. Holt jammed his forearm under its jaw as it snapped at his face, teeth clicking inches from his nose. Brandt kicked the thing in the side of the skull. Once, twice. The third kick broke something, and Holt shoved it off long enough to stab it through the throat with his bayonet. Tomas hurled a fire pot. It shattered against the barricade, spilling burning pitch across the corpse front. Flames crawled over dead faces and into the wooden frame. The living man nailed there began to scream properly then, a thin ripping sound that cut through the drums. "Again!" Brandt shouted. Another pot flew. Then another. The barricade caught. At once, the hidden pushers panicked. Some kept shoving, only to be swallowed by flames dripping down through the beams. Others tried to flee and jammed against those behind them. The machine lurched, groaned, and tipped sideways. That was when the enemy cannon fired again. The shot struck the cliff above the Sally ledge. Stone burst outward. Rocks rained down like the fists of angry gods. One smashed Thomas flat from shoulder to hip. He made a sound like air leaving a bellows, and then there was not enough of him left to make another. Another rock struck a handgunner named Eber in the head, removing everything above his teeth. "Back!" Voss shouted. But Brandt had seen the powder cart. It sat behind the burning barricade, half hidden in the fog, dragged by 2 misshapen oxen, with iron spikes driven through their skulls. Barrels were stacked on it. Not powder barrels from Helmgart, cruder things. Bombs, perhaps. Fire pots. Something meant for the gate. If that cart reached the fortress, the gate would not hold. Brandt pointed. There! Holt stared. Oh, you miserable old bastard. They ran toward it. The ground underfoot was slick with mud, blood, and spilled fat from the burning corpses. Beastmen emerged through the smoke, coughing, eyes watering, weapons raised. Brandt fired his second pistol into one's belly and watched it fold around the wound, entrails pouring, steaming, into its hands. Voss cut another across the throat, so deeply. Its head flopped backward, held only by the spine. Holt rammed his bayonet into a marauder's mouth, punching out the back of the skull in a spray of teeth and bone chips. Then they reached the cart. The oxen screamed as flames licked close. One had 3 eyes. One had no skin on its left side, only red muscle twitching under rain. Brandt hacked at the harness with his sword. Voss climbed onto the wheel and slashed open a barrel. Black powder spilled out in clumps. Holt! Brandt yelled. Match! Holt looked from the powder to the burning barricade to the horde closing around them. This is a terrible plan. It is a short plan, a horn bellowed. Through the smoke came something larger than the others. It wore a cloak of flayed human skins stitched together with wire. Its horns curled outward like a ram's, heavy with bronze rings. Its face was hidden behind a flat iron mask with no eyes, only a vertical slit crusted with old blood. In one hand it carried a mace made from a stone idol chained to a tree trunk, the horned castellan, or some lieutenant of it. Brandt did not care. Names mattered less than reach, and this creature had plenty. It swung the mace. The blow caught one of Brandt's men full in the chest and burst him open. Armor, ribs, lungs, heart, all of it came apart in a wet, red detonation. The body flew backward in pieces. Voss fired her pistol. The shot struck the iron mask and ricocheted with a shriek. The creature turned toward her. Brandt threw himself against its legs. It was like tackling a moving wall. The impact drove the breath from him. He stabbed upward with his sword, burying the blade in the beast's thigh. It grunted, more annoyed than hurt, and kicked him aside. Brandt hit the cartwheel hard enough to see white sparks. Voss met the mace with her sword and nearly died for it. The weapon smashed her guard aside and clipped her helm, sending her sprawling. The beast raised the mace for the killing blow. Holt shoved his burning match into the spilled powder. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the cart became the sun. The explosion tore the road apart. Brandt felt himself lifted, weightless, boneless, deaf. Fire swallowed the world. The oxen vanished in red mist. The cart shattered into burning spears. Beastmen around it came apart in chunks, their limbs spinning into the fog. The masked brute took the blast full in the side. Its cloak of skins ignited. One horn snapped off and pinwheeled away trailing flame. Brandt landed in mud with no memory of falling. For a moment there was no sound at all. Then everything came back at once. Screams, drums, gunfire, rain hissing on fire. Holt yelling something that might have been his name. Brandt rolled onto his back. His ears rang. Blood ran from his nose. The sky above was a dirty gray smear. Holt appeared over him, eyebrows singed away, face blackened. "You alive?" "No, good enough." They dragged themselves back toward the sally door under covering fire from the wall. Voss stumbled beside them, helmet dented, blood running down her cheek. Behind them, the road burned. The rolling barricade had collapsed. The powder cart was gone. The gate still stood. The second assault broke before noon. It left Helmgart gasping. Men cheered this time, but raggedly, bitterly, because they were alive and hated themselves for being surprised by it. The wounded filled the courtyard. Some begged for water. Some begged for death. Some could not beg because their mouths were gone. Brandt sat on the step of the redoubt while a barber surgeon stitched his scalp without kindness. "Hold still," the surgeon said. "I am holding still. You keep bleeding. Then stitch faster." Across the courtyard, Voss watched as Captain Kranz emerged from the officers' hall with Magister Graham. The captain's face was composed, too composed. Graham's hands shook so badly he had tucked them into his sleeves. Voss crossed to them before Brandt could stand. "Sir," she said. Kranz turned. "Lieutenant, a brave counterstroke at the gate. You have my commendation. I went below this morning. The courtyard seemed too quiet around them." Kranz's eyes flicked once to Grimm, then back. "For powder? For answers?" Grimm's lips moved soundlessly. Voss stepped closer. "The sealed chapel has been opened. There are marks beneath the plaster, blood on the floor, objects arranged for ritual use. I heard a voice from the fissure behind the altar." Kranz's expression did not change, but something behind his eyes froze. "You are exhausted," he said. "I know what I saw. You saw old stone and frightened yourself with shadows. No, sir, I saw treason. The words struck harder than cannon fire." Brandt rose slowly. Kranz's aides put hands to sword hilts. Several handgunners noticed. Several hands drifted toward gunlocks. Rain pattered in the silence. Then Kranz smiled, and it was worse than anger. "Lieutenant Voss," he said softly, "walk with me." "No." The captain's smile died. Voss drew from her coat the scrap of blue and white cloth she had found in the chapel. "Whose blood was used?" Grimm made a small noise. Kranz stepped close enough that only Voss, Brandt, and the nearest men could hear. "You think courage wins wars? You think powder and prayers hold mountains? Look around you. Count the men. Count the barrels. Count the dead things on the road, and know they were only the first mouthful." "What have you done?" Voss asked. Kranz looked toward the west, where smoke still rose from the pass. "What command requires? No. What survival requires? No." His voice dropped further. "There is something beneath this fortress. Old, yes. Unclean, yes. But bound, contained. It knows the stone. It knows the pass. It can close the road." Voss stared at him in horror. Grimm whispered, "Not close. Seal. There is a distinction." Brandt stepped forward. "Where is handgunner Dietz?" Kranz's head turned slowly. Dietz had been missing since before dawn. Brandt had noticed, but not yet asked aloud. There had been too many missing, and too much blood. Grimm's mouth twitched. Brandt understood. It was not rage he felt first. Rage was hot. This was cold and heavy and clean. "You used one of my men," he said. Kranz's face hardened. "One man for the fortress." Voss's voice shook. "You murdered him. I offered him. To what? Graham looked up then, eyes bright and feverish. To the candle in the stone. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the mountains, though there had been no lightning. Graham swallowed, but once the words began, he seemed unable to stop them. It was here before Helmgart, before the chapel, before the road, bound in the rock by hands wiser and crueler than ours. It feeds on endings, on vows made under iron, on final acts. It can turn slaughter into a lock, blood into mortar, fire into a gate. Kranz seized him by the arm. Enough. Voss looked sick. What price? The answer came not from Kranz. It came from below. Through the stones, through the rain, through the old bones of Helmgart. All guns, all breaths, one volley, one aim. The courtyard erupted. Men shouted. Some drew weapons. Others backed away from the officers as though corruption were a plague that leapt by sight. The refugees began wailing in the powder vault below, though they could not have heard the words clearly. Perhaps they had felt them. Brandt reached for Kranz. The captain drew his sword. For one terrible second, Empire steel faced Empire steel, while the enemy corpses still smoked outside the gate. Then the western horn sounded again, not from the road, from the cliffs above. A guard screamed from the upper wall. "Ladders! Ladders on the north face!" The argument shattered. Arrows began falling into the courtyard. One struck Graham's sleeve and pinned cloth to flesh. He shrieked. Another drove through a cook's neck, and the man spun in a circle, spraying blood from both sides, before collapsing into a soup pot. Brandt shoved Holt toward the stairs. Wall. Voss kept her pistol trained on Kranz for half a heartbeat longer. "This is not finished," she said. Kranz looked almost relieved. "No, it is not." They ran to the guns. Above, beastmen poured over the north battlement in a tide of horns, axes, and wet fur. The second battle had been a feint. The real teeth were at the throat. The iron choir formed in the smoke once more, fewer now, bloodier, eyes hollow and bright. They had seen too much, heard too much, understood too much. Brandt took his place at the center of the line. Below his boots, deep in the mountain, black candles burned where no wind could touch them. He raised his sword. "Company!" he shouted, voice raw as broken stone. "Prime and load." The men obeyed. Above the drums, above the rain, above the screams of the dying and the laughter under the chapel, the handgunners of Helmgart readied themselves again. Not for victory, not anymore. For the next few minutes of life. Chapter 3. The Iron Choir Sings. The north wall became a mouth full of teeth. Beastmen came over it in clattering waves, dragging themselves up ladders made from pine trunks, wagon shafts, bones, and nailed-together shields. Their hooves scraped the stone. Their claws hooked into cracks. Rain slicked their fur and ran in dark streams through the filth matted across their hides. They stank of wet animal, old blood, and the sour stink of things that had eaten carrion for too long and liked the taste. The first one over the battlement took a handgun ball through the chest. Before its hooves touched stone, the shot punched in below its collarbone and blew out between its shoulders, taking a fist-sized chunk of spine with it. It dropped backward without a cry, striking the ladder behind and knocking 3 more screaming shapes into the fog. "Again!" Brandt roared. The handgunners fired at arm's length now. not in clean ranks but in knots and pairs, wherever there was room to stand and kill. The neat order of empire drill had been broken by the shape of the wall and the fury of the assault. Men crouched behind broken merlons, jammed gun barrels through gaps, fired down into faces, then swung the smoking weapons like cudgels when the enemy came too close. Holt stood beside a cracked cannon embrasure, face black with soot, lips peeled back from his teeth. He fired into a beast-man's open mouth. The back of the creature's head burst across the ladder behind it in red pulp and bone splinters. Holt did not watch it fall. He was already reloading, fingers moving so fast they seemed no longer attached to thought. "Powder!" someone screamed. "Use your teeth!" Brandt shouted back. "I haven't got any." "Then borrow some." A laugh came from somewhere down the line, high and mad, and was cut short when a hooked blade came over the parapet and took the laughing man across the face. His nose, lips, and cheek peeled away in a wet flap. He fell to his knees, trying to hold his features on with both hands while blood pumped between his fingers. A beastman hauled itself over after the blade, only for Lieutenant Voss to slam her pistol under its chin and fire. The top of its skull lifted like a pot lid. Black brain splashed across her breastplate. She kicked the corpse back over the wall. "Hold the stair!" she shouted. "Do not let them reach the courtyard!" There was no proper answer, only gunfire, screams, and the grinding thump of ladders against stone. Below the wall, Helmgart convulsed. The courtyard was a churn of wounded men, refugees, smoke, mules, overturned carts, and splintered timber. Arrows rained into it from the cliffs. One struck a woman carrying water and nailed her hand to the bucket handle. She screamed until another arrow punched into her eye and stopped her. A boy tried to crawl under a wagon, but the wagon horse, maddened by smoke, kicked once and crushed his ribs flat beneath its iron-shod hoof. At the inner gate, Captain Dieter Kranz was gathering men, not to the wall, away from it. Brandt saw it between bursts of powder smoke. Kranz speaking to garrison spearmen, to two of his aides, to a handful of officers whose polished breastplates looked absurdly clean amid the filth. Magister Adjunct Grimm crouched behind them beneath an archway, one sleeve dark with blood from the arrow wound, whispering into his own hands like a man warming himself at a fire no one else could see. Brandt spat blood. He did not know whose. A beastman vaulted over the battlement in front of him, landing with enough weight to crack the flagstone. Its horns were sword-blunt and capped in iron. A chain of human fingers hung around its neck. It swung a cleaver at Brandt's belly. Brandt stepped into the blow rather than away from it. The cleaver's edge rang off his breastplate and bit through the leather straps beneath, scraping his ribs like cold fire. He jammed his sword into the creature's gut and twisted. Hot filth spilled over his hand. The beastman bellowed into his face, breath rank with meat and rot. Brandt head-butted it in the muzzle. Cartilage cracked. He drew his sword free and hacked into the side of its neck once, twice, 3 times, until the head sagged sideways on a hinge of gristle. It still tried to bite him as it died. He kicked it away and turned to find Holt staring down into the courtyard. "Sergeant," Holt said. "The captain. I see him. He's pulling men off the wall." "I see him." "Why?" Brandt looked at the redoubt, at the ladders, at the dead, at the fog thick with horns and crude banners. He looked at the inner keep, where the sealed stair led down into the old chapel and the thing that whispered beneath the stone. "Because he does not think this wall matters any more," Brandt said. Holt's face changed. The last scraps of boyishness went out of it as completely as a candle pinched between wet fingers. Another horn sounded below. The enemy withdrew from the north wall, not all at once, not in panic, in order. That was worse. The beastmen on the ladders dropped away, snarling and shaking weapons. Mutants slithered back down the rocks. Arrows slackened. The drums did not stop. They deepened, spreading through the pass until the very stones seemed to beat with them. The handgunners stood panting among the corpses. Rain pattered on hot barrels. Blood dripped from the parapet. Men looked at one another with the stunned disbelief of those who had survived something only to realize the real thing had not yet begun. Then the fog below the west road parted. The horde came into view, all of it. The first assault had been a claw, the second a fang. This was the beast opening its whole mouth. Thousands crowded the mountain road and the broken slopes beyond it. Beastmen with axes and hooked spears, mutants crawling on too many limbs, men from the north, wrapped in hides and iron, their faces painted with ash, their shields daubed with symbols that made the eyes itch. Warhounds strained on chains, their bodies warped and bristling, some with exposed skulls, some with jaws split back to the ears. Above them rose banners made from flayed bodies, stretched on frames, the skin painted with crude black crowns and burning eyes. At their center stood the horned castellan. There was no mistaking it now. It was taller than any man, and broader than a cart horse, its shoulders hunched beneath plates of stolen armor riveted directly into the flesh. Its iron mask had been cracked by Holt's explosion. One side split open to reveal a single yellow eye and a strip of raw, burned muzzle. One horn remained whole, heavy with bronze rings. The other was a jagged stump, still smoking at the break. The cloak of stitched skins hung charred from its back. In one hand it carried the stone-headed mace. In the other it held the lower watchtower's bell. The castellan raised the bell and struck it with the mace. The sound was enormous. It rolled up the pass, through the gate, across the courtyard, through the bones of the men on the wall. It was not merely heard. It entered the teeth and marrow. Several soldiers cried out and clapped hands over their ears. One of the wounded below began laughing and could not stop, even when blood bubbled from his mouth. The horde began to advance, slowly at first, then faster. "Back to the west redoubt!" Voss shouted. Men stumbled into motion. The iron choir ran down from the north wall, slipping on blood-slick stairs, dragging wounded comrades, kicking loose hands and severed heads from their path. They took positions along the west parapet once more, where the gate road narrowed below the guns. The fortress cannon were reloaded with chain, scrap iron, nails, and anything else the crews could ram into the muzzles. Brandt counted as he moved. 26 handgunners able to stand, 9 garrison soldiers with pikes, 4 cannon crew, Voss, Holt, himself, against the end of the world. Captain Krantz mounted the steps behind the line with 6 armed men at his back. "Sergeant Brandt," he said, voice sharp and carrying, "withdraw your company to the inner keep." Brandt did not look away from the road. No. A few men nearby went still. Kranz's face flushed. "That was an order. I heard it. Then obey." Brandt turned slowly. Rain ran down the scarred grooves of his face. "The enemy is below the gate. The gate is lost. Not yet. It will be. You cannot stop this." Brandt gestured to the line. Stopping things is not the profession. Delaying them is. Kranz descended one step. Do not mistake stubbornness for duty, Sergeant. Voss moved beside Brandt. And do not mistake treachery for command, Captain. The words spread along the wall like fire catching dry straw. Treachery. Men turned. Some looked confused. Others already knew enough to understand. Rumor had been moving through Helmgart since the chapel, carried in glances and unfinished sentences. Kranz's hand dropped to his sword. Lieutenant Voss is relieved of duty. No, Voss said. Her pistol was in her hand before his blade cleared half the scabbard. The horde below roared and surged closer. Now? Holt said, incredulous. You're doing this now? Brandt raised his voice, not to Kranz but to the company. Handgunner Dietz did not die on the wall, he said. He was taken below, offered. The men stared. Brandt pointed with his sword toward the inner keep. There is a thing beneath this fortress, old chaos, bound in the mountain. The captain and his wizard have been bargaining with it. A murmur rose, ugly and frightened. Kranz barked. Lies. Grime appeared at the stair behind him, pale and trembling, eyes fever-bright. Not lies, he whispered. Necessities. The murmur stopped. Grime smiled, as though embarrassed by himself. Do you not understand? You are dead already. All of you. All of us. But death can be shaped. Sacrifice can have architecture. The candle can close the pass. It can make your deaths into stone. Holt slowly turned his handgun toward the wizard. I would rather make your death into soup. Kranz drew his sword fully. Any man who raises arms against his officers dies as a mutineer. Voss's voice cut through the rain. Any officer who bargains with chaos has already deserted the Empire. Below, the first enemy cannon fired. The shot struck the gatehouse. Stone burst inward. A chunk of masonry the size of a barrel smashed down onto two spearmen, folding them into the steps. Blood sprayed across Kranz's polished boots. The gate groaned. Men screamed. The battle resumed all at once. Fire! Brandt shouted. The iron choir turned back to the wall and unleashed thunder. The volley slammed into the advancing horde. The front ranks collapsed in heaps. Beastmen and marauders tumbling over one another, legs shattered, chests opened, skulls burst. Chain shot from the fortress cannon ripped through a knot of shield-bearers, cutting 6 of them in half at the waist. Their upper bodies fell forward, while their legs ran 2 more steps and folded. The warhounds came next. They bounded through the dead, jaws wide, chains trailing behind them. Their handlers released them with shrieks of glee. The beasts hit the lower barricades like living missiles. One leapt so high it struck the gatehouse wall and scrabbled upward, claws tearing grooves in the stone. Holt shot it through the ribs. It fell, hit a spear point below, and split open from throat to groin, spilling steaming organs across the defenders at the gate. Another hound reached the parapet by way of a siege ladder and landed among the handgunners. Its head was too large, its mouth too wide, its teeth arranged in 3 wet rows. It clamped onto handgunner Pfeiffer's thigh and shook him like a rat. The leg tore free at the hip. Pfeiffer's scream became a shrill whistle as blood jetted against the wall. Brandt rammed his sword down through the hound's spine. Voss fired into its skull. It died with its teeth still locked on the severed leg. Pfeiffer stared at the empty place below his belt. "Oh," he said. Then he fainted. The gate cracked, not opened, cracked The timber split under the battering of a ram hidden beneath a canopy of hides. Each blow shook the redoubt. Dust sifted from the stones. Men fired down through murder holes until the holes clogged with smoke and flesh. Boiling water was poured, then oil, then sand heated in kettles, until it hissed when it struck wet skin. Beastmen screamed, their faces blistering, eyes bursting like poached eggs. Still the ram struck. Boom, boom, boom. Behind Brandt, Krantz and his loyalists were moving again, edging toward the inner keep. Voss saw them. "Captain!" she shouted. Krantz did not stop. Brandt grabbed Holt by the shoulder. "Keep them firing." "Where are you going?" "To discuss chain of command." He and Voss left the wall together. The courtyard between the redoubt and inner keep had become a nightmare drawn in mud and blood. Arrows stuck from corpses like reeds in a marsh. A cannon crewman crawled in circles, both legs gone below the knee, leaving red spirals on the stones. Refugees huddled under carts, praying, sobbing, or staring silently at nothing. The surgeon had abandoned his saw and was using a meat cleaver now. Krantz reached the chapel stair with Graham and 4 men. Voss fired first. The shot took one of Kranz's aides in the side of the head. His helmet snapped sideways, and a sheet of blood slapped the wall behind him. He dropped, with his sword still half raised. The courtyard froze for one absurd instant. Then Empire men began killing Empire men. Kranz's loyalists charged. Brandt met the first with his shoulder, driving him into a pillar hard enough to crack stone. The man gasped. Brandt punched his sword through the fellow's belly and felt the point grate against the spine. He pulled the blade free, and the man slid down, clutching at the wound, trying to stuff loops of gut back under his breastplate. Voss crossed blades with another officer, a narrow-faced lieutenant with panic in his eyes and corruption in his courage. He hacked at her wildly. "Hee-haw!" She parried once, twice, then stepped inside his guard and drove her dagger beneath his chin. The blade vanished up to the hilt. His eyes widened. She wrenched it free and kicked him backward. Graham shrieked and flung out one hand. The air rippled. One of the handgunners rushing to help Brandt stopped, as if struck by an invisible hammer. His skin blackened from the inside. Veins glowed blue beneath his face. His eyes boiled in their sockets and ran down his cheeks as milky threads. He opened his mouth, and candle flame poured out. Then he collapsed into ash and armor. Graham laughed, horrified by his own power and delighted by it. "The candle sees," he cried. "The candle remembers." Brandt hurled his empty pistol at him. It struck Grime in the mouth. Teeth flew. The wizard stumbled back, spitting blood and enamel. Krantz lunged at Brandt. The captain was no coward with steel. His first cut nearly took Brandt's fingers. His second opened Brandt's sleeve, and the flesh beneath from wrist to elbow. Pain flashed hot and sharp. Brandt retreated a step, boots slipping. Krantz pressed him, sword moving with parade ground precision made deadly by desperation. "You would doom us all for pride!" Krantz snarled. Brandt caught a blow on his guard. "We were doomed when you started taking advice from cellar voices. It can seal the pass. It wants a choir of dead men to sing it awake. It wants sacrifice." Brandt shoved him back. "It can sacrifice you then." Before Krantz could answer, the gate exploded inward. The battering ram finally broke through. A storm of splinters, iron bands, and broken beams blasted across the lower courtyard. 2 defenders vanished beneath the wreckage. One was impaled through the chest by a jagged plank and pinned upright to a cart, kicking and screaming while blood poured down the wood. Beastmen flooded through the breach, howling, slipping in the mud, trampling the wounded, swinging axes into anything that moved. The inner courtyard dissolved. Handgunners on the wall turned and fired downward into the breach. The first rank of beastmen vanished under shot, but more came over them. A mutant with a crab claw for an arm seized a spearman by the waist and cut him in half with one closing snap. His upper body fell one way, legs the other, both twitching. Holt stood on a stair landing, firing until his gun was empty, then using the barrel to smash a marauder's jaw. "Sergeant, we are very bloody entered!" Brandt glanced from the breach to Kranz. The captain saw it too. Whatever bargain he had made, whatever survival he had imagined, the horde was now inside Helmgart. The fortress was no longer a wall. It was a carcass. Graham staggered to the chapel door, one hand clamped over his shattered mouth. Black blood seeped between his fingers. He fumbled with the keys. Voss raised her pistol. Empty. She hurled it instead. It struck the door as Graham slipped through and slammed it behind him. The black candles beneath the stone flared. Every gun in the courtyard fired at once, not by command, by itself. Handguns, lying beside corpses, cracked and spat flame. Pistols in belts discharged. A cannon on the upper wall boomed, though no crew stood near it. Men screamed as weapons kicked in their hands without trigger or match. Shot tore into beastmen, soldiers, walls, carts, flesh. One ball passed through Kranz's shoulder, spinning him to the ground. Another punched through a refugee's chest and killed the child behind her. For one heartbeat, Helmgart sang, in thunder without human will. Then silence slammed down. From beneath the chapel came the whisper, no longer faint. One volley, one name, one gate. The surviving handgunners stared at their weapons in terror. Brandt understood then. So did Voss. So, perhaps, did Kranz, lying in the mud with blood spreading beneath him and horror finally breaking through his noble mask. The bargain was not coming. It had already begun. Brandt seized Voss by the arm. Inner keep. The chapel. Not yet. We need the powder. She looked toward the breach, where the horned castellan pushed through the shattered gate, stooping beneath the arch, mace dragging sparks from stone. Brandt shouted to the company with everything left in his lungs. "Fall back! Bring powder! Bring shot! Leave the dead! Carry the living only if they can curse!" Holt took up the cry. "Fall back, you beautiful doomed bastards!" The iron choir retreated, step by bloody step. They fired, clubbed, stabbed, dragged powder kegs through mud, and slammed doors behind them as beastmen hurled themselves against the withdrawing line. Handgunner Capel stayed too long at a doorway, firing into the crush until a hooked spear caught him under the ribs and dragged him screaming into the horde. His screams ended under chopping blades. A moment later his severed head came sailing back through the door, eyes still open, mouth full of rain. Voss led the last refugees through the inner gate, cutting down a mutant that had crawled among them pretending to be wounded. Its belly split when she kicked it over, spilling a nest of blind, biting things that Holt crushed under his boots until the stones were slick. Brandt was last through. He saw the courtyard one final time before the inner door shut. Helmgart's outer yard belonged to the enemy. Beastmen capered among the dead. Marauders tore rings from fingers with their teeth. The horned castellan stood amid the ruin, its cracked mask turned toward the inner keep. Behind it, above the shattered gate, the banners of flayed skin whipped in the rain. Captain Kranz crawled in the mud between worlds, one arm useless, one hand reaching toward Brandt. "Sergeant," he gasped. Brandt held his gaze. For a moment, he almost went back. Then Kranz's hand closed around the torn scrap of his own officer's sash, the same blue and white cloth Voss had found below. His lips moved. "All guns," he whispered. Brandt's face hardened. He slammed the inner gate shut. Bolts crashed into place. Inside the keep, darkness swallowed the survivors. There were fewer than 20 handgunners left. Some bled, some shook, some laughed quietly in the way men laughed when their minds had found a crack to hide inside. The powder kegs sat among them like squat little gods. Below their boots, grime chanted in the chapel. Outside, the enemy began battering the inner gate. Boom, boom, boom. Brandt leaned against the wall, breathing hard. Voss stood beside him, sword red to the hilt. Holt sat on a powder barrel and began reloading his handgun with hands that no longer shook. At last, he looked up. "Sergeant," he said. "What now?" Brandt listened to the drums, the chanting, the hammering at the gate, and the whispering stone beneath them. Then he looked toward the upper gun gallery that overlooked the whole pass. "Now," he said, "we make the bastards pay admission." Chapter 4. The Last Volley at Helmgart. The inner keep of Helmgart was older than the Empire banners hanging in its halls, older than the plastered comets, older than the chapel bells, older than the names carved into the stones by generations of bored sentries waiting for enemies that had finally come. It rose from the mountain like a broken tooth, narrow and stubborn, its upper gun gallery thrust out over the pass so that a man standing there could see the road twisting below like a gray serpent through rain and smoke. Sergeant Oskar Brandt climbed toward that gallery with 19 handgunners, 3 powder kegs, 2 crates of shot, 1 wounded lieutenant, and a hatred so cold and solid it might have been forged. Behind them, the inner gate shook. Boom! The enemy had found the ram again, or another like it. Each strike sent dust from the ceiling and grit down the soldiers' collars. Somewhere below, hinges shrieked. Men flinched at every blow, then cursed themselves for flinching and kept moving. Boom! A voice under the floor answered. 1 volley, 1 name, 1 gate. It was louder now, not heard with the ears alone, but felt behind the eyes, in the gums, in the scars that old soldiers swore could sense rain before clouds gathered. The words came from the sealed chapel beneath the keep, from the fissure in the black stone where Magister Adjunct Lothar Grimm had fled with his shattered mouth and his new god. The candle in the stone was waking. Brandt spat blood onto the stairs and kept climbing. "Move," he growled. "Any man who dies on these steps gets carried up and charged for the labor." Corporal Janik Holt staggered behind him with a powder keg hugged against his chest. His eyebrows were burned away, his coat was ripped from shoulder to hip, and one cheek was swollen where a marauder's shield had kissed him with iron. Still, he grinned. "Sergeant, I wish to complain," Holt said. "This fortress has too many stairs," complaint noted. "Will command be responding?" "Command is currently bargaining with the cellar." "Then I withdraw the complaint. The stairs are the least corrupt thing here." Lieutenant Mara Voss came last, one hand pressed to the wall, sword in the other. Blood ran down from beneath her dented gorget and soaked the collar of her coat. She had taken a splinter near the throat when the gate broke, and though the wound had missed the great vessels, it bled freely enough to worry anyone not currently doomed by larger problems. Brandt glanced back. "You should sit. I am walking." "That is not what I said, and I am not doing what you said. Officer, at last." She gave him a look that might have been amusement if her face had not been so pale. They reached the upper gun gallery as the keep shuddered again. Boom! The gallery was a long stone chamber with open embrasures facing west over the pass. 2 light cannons sat on iron-shod carriages, both scorched, both almost out of powder. Between them were firing steps for handgunners, murder slits angled down toward the courtyard, and a great cracked window from which the Helmgart road could be seen all the way to the first bend. The view was a vision from a nightmare. The outer courtyard belonged to the horde. Beastmen capered in the rain, hacking at the dead, hauling wounded men apart, fighting each other over helmets, fingers, scraps of meat. Mutants crawled along the walls like pale spiders. Marauders set fire to carts and waved flaming brands beneath the eaves. The banners of flayed skin snapped above the shattered gate, glossy and pink in the rain. The horned castellan stood before the inner keep. It was blackened from the explosion. One side of its body burned raw. Plates of stolen armor fused to meat. Its cracked iron mask had split further, revealing half a bestial face beneath. Yellow eye, peeled lips, teeth like broken knives. One horn remained. The other was a charred stump jutting from its skull. In both hands it held the stone-headed mace. Around it the horde chanted. Not words any sane tongue should shape. A rhythm. A hunger. The castellan lifted the mace and struck the inner gate. Boom! The whole gallery trembled. Handgunner Albrecht, who had lost 2 fingers and gained a long red smile across his ribs, looked down through an embrasure and whispered, "That door won't hold." "No," Brandt said. "How long?" Brandt looked at the powder, the men, the guns, the chapel stair below, the pass road beyond, long enough to be rude. The survivors spread through the gallery. There were no clean uniforms left, no bright feathers, no parade ground postures. The iron choir were rags and blood, cracked lips and shaking hands, powder-black faces and eyes too bright in the gloom. They loaded, like men digging their own graves, with muscle memory. Holt kicked open a shot crate. Round bowls, chain, nails, broken hinges, 1 cook's ladle. "Save the ladle," Brandt said. "Might kill an officer." Voss moved to the central embrasure and looked down the road. The horde filled it from wall to bend, hundreds upon hundreds still pressing upward despite the dead clogging the pass. More shapes moved in the fog beyond. Too many to count, too many to kill. She turned to Brandt. "If they break through, they take the gallery in minutes. They will break through. And Graham." Brandt looked toward the stairwell behind them. The chapel lay below, down through the keep's belly, beneath powder stores, beneath the old Sigmarite altar, beneath the cracked plaster and black candles. Grimes' chant rose through the stone like smoke through floorboards. Iron sings. Flesh pays. Gates close. Names remain. "He is waiting for the last volley," Brandt said. Voss's mouth tightened. "Then we do not give it to him." "We will." She stared. Brandt pointed down, but not where he wants it. Understanding came slowly, then all at once. Voss looked at the powder kegs, then at the old drainage vents in the floor, the maintenance shaft beyond the cannon rack, the narrow stone throat that ran down through the keep, past the lower stores, almost directly over the chapel vault. Her eyes sharpened. "The powder stores below the chapel," she said, "and the old fissure behind the altar. If we fire into the shaft, we put shot, sparks, and enough black powder through his ritual circle to make the mountain regret being born." Holt had come close enough to hear. His grin faded. "How much of the keep does that leave?" Brandt shrugged. "Interesting question. That means none. It means none." Holt nodded slowly, then looked around at the gun gallery, at the men reloading, at the door shaking below, at the pass full of monsters. Well, it was drafty anyway. The inner gate cracked. The sound rose from below, sharp and final, followed by cheering from the horde. A sliver of cold grey light appeared through the murder holes in the floor as the gate buckled inward. Brandt lifted his sword. "First rank to the west, second to the murder slits. Cannons loaded with scrap. Fire at will until I tell you to stop. Then stop, or I will haunt you with administrative discipline." The iron choir opened fire. The gallery vanished in smoke and thunder. Handguns cracked from the embrasures, their flames bright in the rain-dim air. Balls tore into the packed horde below. A beastman climbing the gatehouse wall took a shot through the pelvis and folded backward, screaming until its skull burst on the stones. A marauder with a hooked spear lost his arm at the shoulder and stared at the stump in stupid wonder before Holt fired again and removed his throat. The first cannon belched nails and chain into a mass of shield-bearers. They came apart in a red spray, armor ringing, limbs thrashing, bodies shredded as though an invisible butcher had dragged knives through them. The second cannon misfired. Its touch-hole spat flame. The barrel bulged. The crew leapt back. "Clear it!" Voss shouted. Handgunner Kappel's brother, a square-faced man named Udo, seized the rammer and tried. The cannon answered by bursting. The explosion tore the gun carriage apart. Iron fragments shrieked across the gallery. One took Udo in the belly and opened him from side to side, spilling his intestines across his boots in steaming coils. Another fragment struck handgunner Albrecht's jaw and tore the lower half of his face away. He dropped beside the cannon, hands clawing at air, making a wet gobbling sound as blood poured from where his mouth had been. The blast knocked Holt flat. Brandt hauled him upright. "You still have legs?" Holt looked down, both present. Morale damaged. "Use the damage." Below, the inner gate failed. The doors crashed inward with a roar of splintered oak and tortured iron. Beastmen flooded into the keep's lower hall. The murder slits lit white as handgunners fired down. Balls plunged into skulls, shoulders, backs. Blood sprayed up through the gaps in hot mist. Men rammed barrels through the slits and shot straight into the press below, killing by touch more than aim. A beastman forced its arm through one of the slits and grabbed handgunner Lutz by the ankle. Lutz screamed as claws punched through boot leather and flesh. Brandt brought his sword down, severing the thing's wrist. The hand remained clamped to Lutz's leg, fingers twitching. Lutz beat at it with his gun stock until the bones cracked. "Reload!" Brandt bellowed. The horde climbed. They came up the stair from the lower hall, slipping in their own blood, clambering over dead, roaring into the smoke. The first reached the gallery door and shoved through the barricade of benches and broken crates. Voss met it with her sword. She cut across its eyes, then stabbed beneath its ribs, and stepped aside as Holt blew its spine out through its back. More followed. The gallery became a narrow slaughterhouse. There was no room for finesse. Men fired once, then clubbed, stabbed, bit, kicked, and died. A mutant with 3 arms and a split belly crawled over the barricade, guts dragging behind it like ropes, swinging knives in all 3 hands. It opened handgunner Rausch across the chest, then shoved one blade into his mouth and out beneath his ear. Rausch died trying to pull the knife free. Brandt crushed the mutant's skull against the wall with the butt of his handgun until its face became paste. Holt was knocked down by a marauder in a horned helm. The man straddled him, raising an axe with both hands. Holt jammed a broken ramrod up under the marauder's chin. The point drove through the tongue and into the brain. The marauder spasmed, dropped the axe, and collapsed forward. Holt shoved him off and came up spluttering blood that was not his. At the far end of the gallery, 2 handgunners held the stair with bayonets. One had his throat ripped out by a warhound that came bounding through the smoke. The dog's jaws closed on his neck and tore away half the windpipe. He fell backward, spraying red across the wall. The other soldier fired into the hound's open mouth and blew its head apart, but not before a beastman's axe split his helmet and buried itself deep enough that the blade stuck in the skull. The defenders fell back toward the maintenance shaft. Brandt saw the count without counting. 12 left, then 10, then 9. The horned castellan entered the lower hall. Even from the gallery, Brandt felt it. The rhythm of the battle shifted. The horde's roar deepened. The floor trembled under each step. Through the murder slit he saw the creature's horn and cracked mask passing below, saw it swing its mace and pulp, 2 of its own followers aside because they were too slow to clear its path. It looked up. For a moment, through smoke and blood and stone, Brandt met its yellow eye. The castellan pointed its mace toward him. Then Captain Dieter Kranz stumbled into the gallery. He came from the chapel stair, not the battlefield. His uniform was torn, his polished breastplate dented and fouled. The ball that had struck his shoulder had left his left arm hanging useless and black with blood. His face was gray. His eyes were feverish. In his good hand he clutched the bent aquila from the ritual circle, its wings twisted into horns. Voss turned her pistol on him. This one was loaded. Krantz did not seem to see it. "It can still be honored," he rasped. Brandt stared at him. "You crawled through the lower passages. The old postern, officer's route." Kranz laughed once, breathlessly. "Coward's door. Useful thing, cowardice." Voss's finger tightened on the trigger. "Stand aside." "No!" Kranz swayed. "You don't understand. None of you understand. I heard it clearly below. The pass can close. The horde can be trapped. Helmgart can still matter. Your men already mattered," Voss said, "before you sold them." Kranz's face twisted. "I did what command demanded. No command demanded this. The Empire demands it every day," he screamed, suddenly furious. "It demands sons, powder, bone, widows, lies. It demands we stand in mud and pretend dying well is different from dying wasted. I found a way to make death useful." Brandt stepped close. Behind him, the surviving handgunners fought at the barricade, buying heartbeats with flesh. The castellan's steps were on the stair now. Grimm's chanting rose louder below. The black candles, unseen but felt, burned brighter. Brandt spoke quietly. "We were willing to die for the pass." Kranz's face broke. "Not for you," Brandt said. Voss fired. The ball struck Kranz in the chest, just above the breastplate's cracked rim. He staggered back, eyes wide, breath punched from him. For one moment he looked almost young. Then blood poured from his mouth. He fell against the wall and slid down it, leaving a dark streak. The bent aquila dropped from his hand and rang against the stone. Below, Graham screamed in triumph. "All guns!" the wizard cried, voice distorted by broken teeth and something burning through him. "All breaths! One volley! One name!" The words rolled up through the gallery, and the handguns answered. Every weapon jerked. Brandt felt his own gun twitch in his grip like a living thing. The match flared. The pan sparked. Around him, men shouted and fought to hold their barrels down. The candle was reaching for them. It wanted the volley. It wanted obedience in the shape of thunder. Brandt slammed the butt of his handgun against the floor. "Now!" Holt and Voss understood first. They kicked the powder kegs toward the maintenance shaft. The old stone cover had already been pried up, revealing a narrow drop into darkness. Wind breathed from below, warm and foul with candle wax, blood, and the rotten sweetness of chaos. The remaining handgunners dragged the cracked cannon toward the opening. Its wheels screamed. A beast-man forced through the barricade and charged. Brandt met it head-on, took the cut across his upper arm, and drove his bayonet into its chest. Holt shot it through the side of the head before it could pull free. "Powder in!" Voss shouted. They tipped the first keg. It dropped into the shaft, struck stone below, and burst. Black powder spilled downward in a rushing hiss. Second keg. Third. Shot followed. Nails. Chain. Broken hinges. The cook's ladle. Anything iron. Anything that would spark, tear, or kill. The gallery door exploded inward. The horned castellan came through. It had to stoop beneath the arch, shoulders scraping stone. 2 handgunners fired into its chest. The balls punched through burned flesh and dented armor, but did not stop it. It swung the mace in a flat arc. One man was crushed against the wall so completely his body burst from the pressure, blood and organs squeezing out around the stone head of the weapon. The other was struck in the hip and torn in half. His upper body landed near Holt, still blinking, hands scraping at the floor until a beast-man behind the castellan stamped his head flat. Voss lunged for the castellan's ruined side. Her sword pierced meat between armor plates. The creature roared and backhanded her. She flew across the gallery and struck the cannon rack with a crack that made Brandt's stomach turn. She slid down, gasping, alive but barely. Brandt stood between the castellan and the shaft. The creature lowered its cracked mask toward him. Its breath rolled out hot and carrion thick. Brandt raised his sword. "You're late," he said. "Admission's gone up." The castellan swung. Brandt did not try to block. He dropped. The mace passed over him and pulverized the wall behind, showering him with stone shards. He thrust upward with everything left in him, driving his sword into the creature's burned knee. The blade sank deep. The castellan staggered. Holt shoved a handgun into the stump of the creature's broken horn. "Smile, you goat-faced prince of sewage." He fired. The shot blew through the damaged skull plate and burst from the side of the castellan's head in a spray of bone, burned hide, and yellow eye fluid. The monster reeled but did not fall. It caught Holt with one hand and lifted him off the floor. Holt screamed as the fingers crushed his ribs. Brandt hacked at the wrist. Once, twice. The castellan squeezed harder. Holt's scream became a wet grunt. Blood sprayed from his mouth. Voss, crawling now, reached Kranz's fallen pistol. She aimed from the floor and fired into the castellan's one remaining eye. This time the creature fell. It crashed down like a collapsing scaffold, shaking the gallery from end to end. Holt dropped with it, limp and gasping, but alive. The castellan thrashed once, mace gouging the floor, then lay still, its skull leaking black blood and smoke. No one cheered. There were 5 of them left. Brandt, Voss, Holt, handgunner Lutz, with the severed claw still attached to his ankle. Old Brenner, who had one ear and no expression at all. Below, Grimes' chant had become a shriek. "You cannot deny the candle," he howled. "It has your fear. It has your dead. It has your guns." The black candles flared up through the shaft. Blue-black flame crawled along the spilled powder like a curious hand. Brandt looked down and saw the chapel far below through gaps in the stone. The cracked altar, the blood circle, Graham standing in the middle with both arms raised, his mouth split wider than any human mouth should go. Behind him, the fissure in the mountain had opened like an eye. Within it burned a single black flame, tall and thin, bending toward the living. The candle in the stone whispered, with 1,000 stolen voices, "Sing." Brandt lifted his handgun. The others did the same. Not toward the horde, not toward the pass. Down, into the shaft, into the powder, into the chapel. Graham saw them. His expression changed from ecstasy to terror. "No," he breathed. Brandt's match burned low. Rain blew through the shattered embrasure and hissed against the barrel. Outside, the horde still climbed, still screamed, still came on. The pass was full of enemies. The keep was full of dead. Helmgart was finished, but the choice, at the last, was theirs. Brandt looked at Voss. She nodded once. He looked at Holt. Holt coughed blood and smiled. "Iron Choir," he whispered. Brandt raised his voice for the last command. "Company." The 5 survivors took aim. Fire. The last volley at Helmgart was not neat. It was not clean. It was not the disciplined crack of parade ground drill or the proud thunder of a regiment at review. It was ragged, furious, wounded, and human. 5 guns fired down into darkness. Sparks leapt. Shot screamed through the shaft. Powder flashed white. For half a heartbeat, everything stopped. Then the mountain answered. The powder below ignited in a roaring column. Fire punched upward through the shaft, downward into the chapel, outward through old cracks in the stone. The ritual circle vanished in white flame. Graham was lifted from his feet, his robes burning, his limbs snapping backward as the blast took him apart. His skin blackened, split, and peeled from his body in burning strips. His skull burst against the altar, and what remained of him scattered into the fissure he had worshipped. The candle screamed. It was not a voice. It was stone breaking. It was children crying in empty rooms. It was every dying oath ever made beneath Helmgart being ripped open and denied. The chapel floor collapsed. The lower powder stores went next. The explosion tore through the keep from the inside. Walls bulged. Arches split. Black candles guttered out in the blast. Their flames stretched thin and shrieking. The inner hall became a furnace. Beastmen packed in the lower chambers were cooked in their armor, blown through doorways, crushed under falling stone. Marauders vanished in sheets of flame. Mutants popped like swollen ticks. The upper gun gallery broke free from the keep. For an impossible moment, it hung over the pass, cracked and burning, full of smoke, blood, and the last echoes of thunder. Brandt felt the floor vanish beneath his boots. He did not fall at once, or perhaps he did, and time simply slowed to let him see. He saw Voss braced against the wall, sword still in hand, face lit by fire from below. He saw Holt laughing silently as the world came apart around him. He saw the horned castellan's corpse slide into the shaft after its master's bargain. He saw Krantz dead against the wall, eyes open, his polished breastplate reflecting flame. Then the gallery fell. Stone, guns, men, monsters, powder, banners, and centuries of imperial masonry plunged into the pass. The road below split under the impact. The cliff face cracked from root to crown. A slab of mountain, the size of a cathedral, sheared away and came down upon the horde. The sound was beyond thunder. It swallowed drums, horns, screams, prayers, and the last burning whisper of the candle. Helmgart collapsed into its own pass. The horde died beneath stone. Some were crushed flat before they could look up. Some were buried standing, mouths open, hands raised. Some were driven into the mud by falling blocks, bones forced out through flesh by the pressure. The flayed banners disappeared under rubble. The broken gate vanished. The lower watchtower slid from its spur and shattered in the gorge below. Rain fell into the dust. For a long time, there was nothing else. 3 days later, men from an eastern outpost reached what had been Helmgart. They came carefully, weapons loaded, boots wrapped in cloth to muffle sound. They expected enemies. They expected survivors. They expected orders. They found a mountain pass choked with rubble and bodies. The fortress was gone from the waist down. The outer walls leaned like drunkards. The inner keep had split open, showing blackened rooms and broken stairways to the rain. The road was buried under tons of stone. Beastmen corpses jutted from the debris in pieces. A horn here, a hoof there, a claw locked around a broken musket barrel. The air still stank of powder and cooked meat. Of Kranz's iron choir, they found little. A scorched helmet. A sword bent nearly double. A handgun fused to a slab of stone. A pistol with its grip burned black. On a surviving wall of the upper gallery, half collapsed but still standing, someone had carved words into the stone with a bayonet or knife. The letters were rough, hurried, and darkened by smoke. Here stood the iron choir. They sang in thunder. The soldiers from the eastern outpost stood in silence before it. One removed his hat. Another made the sign of the hammer. None spoke for several minutes. Then the rain began again, soft at first, then steady, washing ash from the stones and blood from the road that was no longer a road. Deep beneath the rubble, where the chapel had been, something flickered, a single black candle. Its flame was small, wounded, furious, waiting